10-minute Q&A session. So the mic is yours. You may begin.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad Makram and distinguished colleague. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning in Turkey, but good afternoon here in Indonesia. So I wish all blessed with good health and safety. So I'm honored to be part of this timely webinar hosted by the League of Parliamentarians for Al-Quds. I offer my sincerest gratitude to everyone who has contributed to this occasion, with this noble occasion. I thank you especially for your hard work as we are facing one of the most difficult time due to the COVID-19 outbreak that has exhausted both mental and physical resources globally. So in the face of these troubling times, I think the League of Parliamentarians for Al-Quds has shown a double effort in ensuring the cause of Palestine is highlighted on a global platform. We will not let Israel exploit the current situation by continuing their illegal measures against Palestine. Therefore, it is very important to consistently voice out our unwavering support for the Palestine cause by taking effective steps towards the right directions. So before proceeding with the topic, why my country, Indonesia, cannot normalize relations with Israel, allow me to reaffirm that to stand with Palestine is to stand with humanity. So it is not a debate of Arabs versus Jews or Islam versus Judaism. Such a perspective is totally can be mistaken. So we are talking about the lands of Palestinian people that were stolen by Israel for more than 7 decades. It is not a conflict between two equal sides. It is an occupation by a powerful military state armed and supported by the West against impoverished, stateless, and displaced people. So for over 70 years, Israel has subjected Palestinians to systematic human rights abuses, severe discrimination, and deadly military force. Palestinians have been forced to leave their homeland with neither hope nor future, and many of them are being brought up in refugee camps, in chronic poverty, and denied the right to return to their family homes. So in addition, over 1 million Palestinians suffer from discrimination over access to public services, land, and employment. Furthermore, Israel's siege of Gaza has condemned its 1.9 million inhabitants to a life of poverty and psychological violence. The construction of the apartheid wall, the military closure of the Jordan Valley, and the annexation of East Jerusalem create an irreversible reality of permanent occupation. So in short, the catastrophe that Palestinian people face is one of the most shameful global injustices of our modern time. Palestine is the only country in the world to have remained colonized. So Indonesia's unceasing support for Palestine, the parliament, the government, and its people has never changed and will never change. Our constitution explicitly stipulates that independence is the inalienable right of all nations. Therefore, all colonialism must be abolished in this world, as it is not in conformity with humanity and justice. So this is the preamble of our constitution. So in that line, Indonesia was one of the co-organizers of the Asian African Conference, the Bandung Conference in 1955, April 1955, that gathered representatives from 29 governments of Asian and African nations. The core principles of the Bandung Conference were inter alia political self-determination and non-aggression. So in other words, the Bandung Conference was a historical moment which was viewed as a milestone for many Asian African countries to obtain their independence. Palestine remains as the only participant of the 1955 Bandung Conference who has not reached independence. Hence, Indonesia bears moral responsibility to ensure the independence of the Palestinian people. To quote one of our founding fathers, Sukarno, he said, "As long as the freedom of Palestine is yet to be returned to the Palestinians, Indonesia will forever stand in defiance against the occupation by Israel." So Indonesia has taken firm measures in support of Palestine, both verbally and through action. To mention few of Indonesia's most recent efforts, one, in June 2020, Indonesia, along with Tunisia and South Africa, initiated a ministerial level UN Security Council meeting to discuss Israel's annexation plan over the West Bank. So Indonesian mission called the international community to oppose Israel's plan as it violates the international laws and threatens the future of the Palestinian people. Two, Indonesia's unquestionable support was strongly reflected during its non-permanent membership of the UN Security Council, UNSC, for 2019-2020 period, particularly during its UNSC chairmanship in May 2019. Three, on the 13th of March 2016, the government of Indonesia inaugurated Indonesia's first honorary consul to the Palestine. Four, in March 2016, Indonesia hosted the extraordinary summit of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, on Palestine that adopted an important point to heighten the pressures on Israel with respect to the future of the state of Palestine. Five, providing financial assistance and capacity building programs for Palestine, including the establishment of the Indonesia Hospital in the Gaza Strip. And last July, Indonesia donated around 2.6 million in humanitarian aid for Palestinian refugees. Of total, $1 million was channeled through UNRWA and $500,000 through ICRC. So over more than a decade, Indonesia has spent around $8 million on over 170 training programs for more than 2,000 Palestinians. Six, to note, implementing a tax-free policy for Palestinian products such as dates and olive oils in order to support the Palestinian economy. So meanwhile, Indonesian parliament, in our parliament, we have been playing a contributive role in support of Palestine inter alia. Just to mention several items. One, taking the initiative to adopt a joint statement signed by over 200 parliamentarians from 34 countries, among others, around 4 speakers of the parliamentarians. And it was launched on the occasion of International Day of Parliamentarism on June 30th, 2020. The statement expresses the firm condemnation and rejection of the Israeli annexation as a flagrant violation of international law and global rules-based order. Two, we are regularly establishing parliamentary friendship groups with the Palestine Parliament until now. And three, highlighting the Palestinian cause in regional and global parliamentary forums. In addition to that, also holding various forums that specifically focus on Palestine issues. Indonesian parliaments joined to co-sponsor the 138th Assembly of the Inter-Parliamentary Union Resolution in Geneva, March 27, 2018, on the consequences of the US Declaration on Jerusalem and the rights of the Palestinian people in Jerusalem in light of the UN Charter and Resolution, which was successfully adopted by consensus. And further, on the 4th APR General Assembly held in Bandung, 2009, Indonesian Parliament also succeeded in convincing all members to adopt resolution human rights violation in Palestine and war crimes by the Zionist regime in Gaza. During the Indonesian Parliament presidency of the Parliamentary Union of OIC countries, PYC, in 2012, the Speaker of the Indonesian Parliament at that time was the only PYC president who had visited the besieged Gaza Strip. And 5, based on the Indonesian Parliament's proposal in 2012, the Parliamentary Union of IC countries, PYC, decided to appoint the Committee on Palestine as one of the PYC Standing Committee. So it is important also to note remarkable roles played by the Indonesian civil societies, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, to support Palestinian people. Indonesian non-governmental organization, Medical Emergency Rescue Committee, MERSI, for instance, started to build an Indonesian hospital in Gaza Strip in early 2013. The total donation from the Indonesian for this hospital was approximately 2.1 million US dollar. So other Indonesian NGOs such as Sahabat Al-Aqsa, ACT, PKPU has been following suit. To Indonesia pledges its unequivocal support for Palestine and beyond. The struggle of Palestine has been at the very heart of Indonesia's foreign policy. Accordingly, the Palestinian cause is ever present in all aspects of Indonesian diplomacy. For more than 7 decades, the developments of Palestinian cause have been not fair for the Palestinian people. So the global community has failed to end the conflict and provide a win-win solution. So instead, the Palestine situation continues to worsen, particularly due to the recent proposals presented by the US, which fully ignore the Palestinian aspiration. Most recently, the US government under Donald Trump's leadership has been encouraging Arab nations to embrace ties with Israel. The UAE, along with Bahrain, have inked a normalization agreement titled the Abraham Accords at the White House in September. Subsequently, Sudan struck a similar deal in October and followed by Morocco a few days ago. So Israel looks to cunningly take advantage of the global circumstance as a distraction to undermine the political standing of Palestine. The Israeli effort to extend its political recognition from Muslim countries will continue to increase. Supported by the US, its biggest ally, Israel moves forward on seeking ways and means for normalization. Muslim countries must remain on high alert. Indonesia, both the world's most populous Muslim nation and the largest Muslim representative, has been a long-time target for Israel in terms of receiving the normalization. Recently, the U.S. International Development Finance Corp offered an aid of up to $2 billion in exchange for Indonesia's agreement to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. So Indonesia, without a doubt, has rejected such an offer. Indonesia does not make economic reason as a consideration to normalize with Israel and sacrifice its identity as an anti-colonial nation, which is enshrined in our very constitution. Undeniably, Israel is a colonizer and they have occupied the lands and the people of Palestine for a long time. Therefore, normalizing Israel would be a flagrant constitutional violation. Furthermore, Indonesia takes the view that the normalization of Israel would only politically benefit Israel instead of Palestine. It would also be perceived as a landslide victory for Israel and further setback for Palestine. In fact, such a move does not coincide with Israeli goodwill to reassume the halted peace process based on international parameters. For this reason, I am particularly concerned over the many Arab states' adoption to normalize their relation with Israel, all the while Israel exercises blatant violations without any punishment imposed. The illegal Israeli settlements that have distorted the Palestinian landscape, both demographically and socially, have devastated the lives of Palestinians for more than 7 decades. This pain continues today and will keep continuing until the global community rectifies the situation. Normalizing Israel will dampen the hopes of achieving a two-state solution based on the 1967 borders, which agrees on a viable and sovereign Palestinian state with Jerusalem as the capital. So I am worried that the growing movement of Israel normalization will cause allies to accept the state of Palestine in the mind, yet not in the physical reality. For Indonesia, the most urgent task is to find the most effective way to provide robust political support for Palestine instead of normalizing Israel. This stance will not recede, whatever will be. A hope for an independent, democratic, sovereign, and viable state of Palestine must be maintained. In my opinion, we should consider following these steps in terms of supporting Palestine politically. One, scaling up on Palestinian statehood recognition. Every moment, channel, track, forum, and any possible opportunity should be seized to echo Palestinian statehood recognition. There are a few countries that have not given the recognition. However, most of the world's nations stand with Palestine. Now, the urgent need is to unite this nation with joint actions against Israel intractability. Two, upgrading and improving bilateral relation with Palestine in terms of politics, social, cultures, and economics. It could be further channeled through governments, parliaments, businesses, academics, people, and NGOs. Three, preserving and maintaining the Palestinian cause as both regional and global concern. Although the COVID-19 pandemic currently persists, the Palestinian issue should not be left behind. Four, isolating Israel from any interaction among nations, especially related to economic activities, through the campaign to boycott, divestment, and sanction (BDS). Importantly, I emphasize that these actions are not motivated by anti-Semitism. It is an act of retaliation and condemnation towards the illegal Israel occupation of Palestine. And therefore, it is a deserved response to Israel's stubbornness, and it is a fight for justice and humanity. Five, demanding fair and impartial settlements for Palestine-Israel conflict in accordance with the rules-based order. The UN seems powerless when forcing Israel to comply with even the most standard international parameters. Our big global homework is to make the UN more democratic and accommodative. In the near future, it will be quite a relief because Donald Trump's regime is coming to an end. His unconditional support to Israel has consigned the Palestinian people with little to no hope. No land, no state, and no future. However, this destructive policy will be difficult to reverse and will continue to inflict damage and suffering. Now we expect his successor, Joe Biden, to make a better decision than his predecessors. So to conclude, allow me to call on Palestinian factions to reassume their attempts for frank reconciliation. The Palestinian reconciliation is of utmost importance for many reasons, particularly to preserve the hope for the creation of a sovereign, independent, viable, and democratic state of Palestine with Al-Quds, Jerusalem, as its eternal capital. The disintegration among Palestinian factions will only work in Israel's favor. So we need to believe that the Palestinian unity is the single largest source of force to overcome the arrogance and conceitedness of Israel. So thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I hope your word clarified crystal clear the Indonesian stance on this important issue. But let me try to summarize or just remind our viewers of the main points in your speech. First of all, it was a very rich speech, actually. There are so many important points. Dr. Fadli Zon talked about that the stand with Palestinians and Palestine is not merely standing with a country or a direct cause, but it's also standing with humanity. And that conflict or that standing is not related to religious or racial conflict. It's a matter of principle. For 70 years or more, Palestinians suffered from an occupation that intended to make itself permanent. It is the most shameful global situation. The stand of the Indonesian government and people on Palestine won't change, because the constitution does not allow that. It's also Palestine participated in the Bandung Conference in 1955, which declared 4 principles, including self-determination. The only country which is not yet independent is Palestine. Sukarno, one of the founding fathers of Indonesia, stressed that as justice is not delivered in Palestine, Indonesia will always be at the side of the Palestinians. Indonesia supported Palestine in the UN and other international organizations. Actually, Dr. Fadli talked about many examples on this regard. He also enumerated ways that the government of Indonesia supported Palestine, including providing financial assistance and capacity building. He said that in the last decade, Indonesia gave about 8 million USD. He also said that the government followed a free tax policy to encourage Palestinians' products. The Indonesian parliament rallied the parliamentarians of the world and stressed the right of Palestine. He highlighted, he said also that we worked on highlighting the Palestinian cause in international forums. Actually, it's a very rich speech, so many points. Yes. Recognizing Israel and normalizing with Israel would be against the constitution. It would be also against the interests of the Palestinian people. Israel should be punished for its violation. Normalizing with Israel would end the two-state solution. And instead of normalizing with Israel, we should work on supporting Palestine. He He also enumerated 5 ways to support Palestine. Number 1 was recognizing the state of Palestine, as there are still many countries in this world who did not do so. The second thing, upgrading the relation with Palestine. Yes. Then preserving the Palestinian rights and isolating Israel. Finally, demanding a fair solution for the conflict. He also stressed that the Trump administration made it possible for the Israeli government to normalize with more and more Arab countries. He hoped that the new policy of the President-elect Joe Biden would change the situation in favor of the Palestinian people. He called also Palestinian factions to reconcile, as unity is the way to liberation and having the promised state of Palestine. I guess this is most of what Dr. Fadli said. Hope I didn't miss much. Now we will open the floor for questions. If anybody would like to put a question for His Excellency, I think he would be happy to answer them. But in the beginning, if you may allow me, I would like to ask a question, Your Excellency, related to the UNRWA. You know that UNRWA is the agency set up by the United Nations to help Palestinian refugees as a sign of acknowledging the responsibility for the Palestinian suffering. Yet now, the United States, which was the main sponsor, cut the aid about, I think it was about 300 million USD yearly. Yet we have big countries and rich Muslim countries who are not able to fill the gap. When we talk about 300 million USD yearly, I think OIC wouldn't actually find it difficult to sponsor this gap, as all of us know that Palestinians inside Palestine, Gaza Strip, West Bank, and in the diaspora, they still suffer from very difficult social and health situation. How would you comment on that?
Well, thank you, Dr. Makram, Muhammad Makram. So, I think make a conclusion and sum up of my remarks, and it is very brilliant summary. Regarding the UNRWA, I think you put it right. You know, this is very important for the OIC countries to sit down together and to talk, to discuss how to fill the gap of the US unilateral action to cut the aid with $300 million a year. I think there should be an initiative through the OIC countries. I don't know, maybe Turkey or Indonesia or other countries can take the initiative to have a conference or gathering on this matter. And I think most of the OIC members will agree that they can have also, fill the gap of this donation from the US as the main sponsor of the UNRWA. But maybe through the parliamentarian channel, we can also advise to our own government about this matter. I will also maybe pass the idea about the initiative towards this matter, because it really can help the Palestinian directly and instantly. I think that is my response, Dr. Makram.
Thank you, sir. So, any more questions? Anybody would like to put a question or even a remark? Okay. In that case, let me put another question, and that would be all if nobody has more questions. Your Excellency, you know that there are other countries who are still objecting to normalization with Israel, including big countries like Pakistan, as His Excellency Mushahid Hussein, the chairman of the International Relations Committee in the Pakistan Senate, a few days ago stressed. He said that Pakistan firmly stands against normalization with Israel. Also, in other countries like Iran. So we are basically talking about the big Islamic powers in terms of population and also in other terms. But from what we see in the media, we have the impression that the whole Muslim world is going towards normalization with Israel. How can we convince those countries who are reluctant or those who already actually took the move that this is not the right way to approach the Palestinian cause, and how we could change their policy and the way they think? This is a question.
Well, it is a very difficult question, Dr. Muhammad Makram, but I will take the example of Indonesia. Maybe that's easier to approach. That Indonesian parliaments, I think most of the factions in our parliament rejected also the idea of normalization of this. Not a single faction even agree on this normalization issue. So I think it can be said it's consensusly the Indonesian people reject the idea of normalization. And then it's already stated by the Minister of Foreign Affairs and also by the President of the Republic of Indonesia, because the rejection from the people's really enormous. Yeah. And I think from all sides of the people, from all the elements of the people, they also reject the idea of normalization with Israel, even though maybe certain individual, yeah, try to take advantage of this by giving hopes and ideas to other side, yeah, about the possibility of normalization. But I think 99% is almost impossible to have a normalization with Israel, with the Indonesian people rejected the idea. And I think around 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, we held one of the biggest demonstration against, at the time, the decision made by the US to move the embassy to Jerusalem. I think hundreds of thousands of Indonesian people gathered in Jakarta to reject the idea. So normalization is almost impossible until Palestine is free and become independent.
We have a question here, if you would be kind enough to answer it. Mr. Omar is asking, what would be the position of the Indonesian parliament if the Indonesian government normalizes relations with Israel?
Well, because the government already stated, the president and the minister of foreign affairs, that we already rejected the idea of normalization. So I think that's already answered the question. And also the parliaments already agree on this. We rejected all the ideas of normalization. So we can conclude that Indonesia will not have a normalization with Israel. And even for calling visa, we also rejected the idea, but diplomatic relation is almost impossible for the time. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think it cannot be more clear than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think we have to conclude. Sir, thank you very much for this very enlightening speech. Hopefully, you clarified the position of Indonesia well enough. And inshallah, we will meet in future events for Al-Quds, Al-Aqsa, and Palestine. Thank you very much and hope to see you very soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.